Distinguished delegates, I would like to call this meeting to order. Dear colleagues, good time of the day. It is a pleasure to be with you today to continue to chair this session on Agenda Item 6 on resource mobilization and the financial mechanism, which we began yesterday. Before I reopen the floor for statements, I will give the floor to the Secretariat for some technical reminders. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good day, everyone. I would like to remind participants of some technical matters. When the Chair invites for interventions, if you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list visible to the Chair. When the Chair gives you the floor, the moderator will activate your microphone. The status bar will turn red on your computer and you may start to speak immediately. If the Chair gives you the floor to speak and you have not raised your hand, please press the raise hand button so the moderator can see you on the list and activate your microphone. If any party encounters connectivity issues that prevent them from making their statement, they should contact the Secretariat to make alternative arrangements. We would also like to remind participants that the chat box is for brief communication and therefore to keep your remarks there short. The time for statements is limited to 3 minutes for parties, 5 minutes for regional groups. A clock is provided for you on the screen to help you to manage your time. But please do not speed up your reading, as it will be challenging for interpreters to follow you. Please note that towards the mid-session, the Chair will announce a 15-minute break. There is no need to log off during this time. The CBD Secretariat has developed an online application that allows countries and organizations to upload their statements to the meeting page. It is highly recommended that participants use this tool instead of emailing their statements, as it helps streamline the meeting process and facilitates the work of the interpreters. We will still, however, monitor the email address statements@cbd.int. Uploading instructions were included in your priority pass email along with your dedicated link, which leads you directly to the upload page. A 6-minute instructional video explaining both how to upload statements and how our online conference system works is being played at the break time, as well as just before we convene each morning. Please be sure to include the name of your country or organization and the agenda item on the first page of the statement that is uploaded. Participants are encouraged to allow their statements to be posted on the meeting page. With regard to the uploading of statements, we note that some parties and regions are still not uploading their statements in advance of delivery. We sincerely request that for the sake of effective interpretation, that you upload your statement before you request the floor. The interpreters are having some difficulty owing to the various challenges posed by working in a virtual setting. There is often background noise when you are speaking, which makes it nearly impossible to hear you clearly enough to interpret into other languages. Rest assured that your statement will not be made public until after delivery. Please note that the statements will be posted online on the meeting page once they have been delivered by the respective parties and registered observers, subject to the agreement of the parties and observers concerned. The website will be updated accordingly each day. Statements will not be posted in advance of delivery. However, once the agenda item is completed, In the case that not all statements of observers are presented orally because of lack of time, those statements that have been provided in good time will be posted, again, subject to the agreement of the observer concerned. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Dear colleagues, when we adjourned yesterday, we had the following parties on the list of speakers: China, United Kingdom, Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, Uganda, Argentina, Norway, Canada, South Africa, Switzerland, and Ecuador. We did our best to record those who requested the floor, but if we missed any, you will have the opportunity to request the floor once I reopen the queue. But please do not raise your hand now. Rest assured that all parties will have an opportunity to speak. So I will start with the parties that requested the floor yesterday, and I will call on the parties in the queue in accordance with the list I just read out individually. So please raise your hand only when I call your name. Please also remember that statement should not exceed 3 minutes. So I will take the first intervention from China. China, please raise your hand. China, you have the floor.
谢谢主席，请问可以听？
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear? Can you hear me? 是的，非常清楚。We thank the Secretary very much for the work done in providing information on this item. Resource mobilization is key to transformation, change, and to the post-2020 GBO. The issue of resource mobilization is key to meet financial needs of countries, especially developing countries. Article 20 of the Convention has clear requirement that sufficient sustainable financial support for developed countries still remains the main source. We need to increase the willingness of in developed countries to contribute financially. Innovative contribution is only a supplementary and should not dilute the responsibility of developed countries. The pandemic has taken a heavy toll on the world economy, and it is difficult to raise more funds in this regard. In addition to continuing contribution to developed countries, we need to do the three things. First, optimize allocation and management. Second, mobilize private funding. Let more businesses, organizations, communities invest in biodiversity. Three, under effective mechanism, redirect harmful subsidies to developing countries for biodiversity conservation. We also recommend that consideration be given to development of a resource mobilization follow-up plan. Thank you.
United Kingdom, could you please raise your hand? United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The UK would like to thank the Secretariat and the expert panel for their work in preparing the documents. Mobilising the resources required to implement the new Global Biodiversity Framework will be instrumental in achieving the transformative change we know is necessary. We must take global action to ensure the resources available are commensurate with the high ambition we need to see in the goals and targets. We agree with the findings of the expert panel that a comprehensive approach to closing the finance gap is necessary. The evidence is clear. We must maximise the effectiveness and efficiency of resources from all sources, domestic and international, private and public. We must identify and scale up innovative new mechanisms, particularly unlocking untapped resources from the private sector. And we must be equally ambitious in our efforts to drive down expenditure that harms biodiversity. A target on resource mobilisation should reflect this three-pronged approach. We would support a resource mobilisation target in the framework on closing the biodiversity finance gap. Finance planning will have a key role to play in maximising the efficiency and effectiveness of resource use. We are grateful to BioFin and support further work to refine their methodology to better help parties develop biodiversity finance plans. However, parties must continue to be able to exercise flexibility in how they undertake their finance planning to account for national circumstances and priorities. At the One Planet Summit in January, the UK Prime Minister announced that of the £11.6 billion that we've committed to climate finance initiatives, we're putting £3 billion to protecting nature, and we encourage other parties to take similar approaches. There is great potential to harness co-benefits of climate finance, and we would like to see this emphasised in the draft decision and included in the future strategy for resource mobilisation. Given GEF is the financial mechanism for CBD, as well as other environmental conventions, we look forward to the opportunity that the GEF 8 replenishment negotiations will provide to consider these synergies further. The GEF will be crucial in delivering the post-2020 framework, and we look forward to further discussions on the terms of reference for the review of the financial mechanism, the needs assessment, and the outcome-oriented framework of programme priorities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Colombia, please raise your hand. Colombia, you have the floor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. For Colombia, it is crucial that a greater ambition in the GBF comes with an equivalent ambition to increase resource mobilization and means of implementation in order to achieve the new commitments to be adopted. Colombia welcomes the report of the panel of experts, which lead us to conclude that the efforts related to this topic cannot be limited to one single target. Based on the panel conclusion, it is key to integrate the following 5 critical elements. First, a commitment to significantly increase resource mobilization from all sources, such as bilateral and multilateral cooperation, private sector, and national public resources for biodiversity, including the GDP allocation for 1% to biodiversity following the OECD guidelines. Second, increase the efficiency in the use of resources and reduce their demand through a stronger biodiversity mainstreaming in the budgets of all productive sectors, promoting nature-based solutions to enable sustainable productive activities while addressing economic and social challenges on the green and equitable recovery post-COVID-19 scenario, and eliminating and reorienting harmful subsidies and promoting positive incentives for biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. Third, promoting sustainable within the financial institution as a fundamental element for the approval of investment and loans, including by establishing environmental safeguards, especially when supporting post-pandemic recovery package. Fourth, build capacity in developing countries to measure financial needs and to provide innovative solutions, including by expanding the implementation of the BioFin initiative or similar methodologies. And fifth, the GEF in its 8th and 9th replenishment must fully serve the implementation of the GBF with significant synergies with the RIA conventions and other sustainable development process and other funds as the GCF. In addition, Colombia recognized the usefulness of the work by the OECD, especially in relation to evaluating the impact and efficiency of incentives associated with the management of biodiversity, as well as their support provided to parties to report on biodiversity finance. Also, we believe that the resource mobilization commitments to be made under the GBF should be a central element to be included on the provide planning, reporting, and review mechanism for the CBD. All parties and relevant stakeholders must be able to report on resource mobilization progress as well as on the gaps presented towards the fulfillment of the financial targets. Finally, we welcome the Dasgupta review commissioned by UK, which affirms what Colombia has already included in our National Development Plan with respect to understanding biodiversity and its ecosystem services as a strategic asset for global sustainable development. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Colombia. Brazil, please raise your hand. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I will make some preliminary comments on behalf of Brazil on this agenda item, and our official position will be presented at the formal face-to-face meeting. Brazil has consistently emphasized the importance of a robust resource mobilization component within the post-2020 GBF. Once again, we would like to stress the need for a balanced and realistic framework and highlight the stark contrast between the significant number of conservation and mainstreaming targets and only one single target on resource mobilization in the updated Zero Draft. We welcome the draft elements on Annex 1 of document SBI-3/5 for possible inclusion in the post-2020 GBF. However, we would like to highlight the parties should be given the opportunity to contribute during SUBSA 24 and SBI-3 with additional elements related to goals and targets to maintain coherence with discussions on indicators. In addition, while we appreciate comprehensive analysis undertaken by the expert panel on resource mobilization, we understand that the draft component requires further improvement. Brazil acknowledges the relevant synergies between mainstreaming biodiversity and resource mobilization. At the same time, efforts to incorporate biodiversity impacts in the finance sector and in business should consider different national socio-economic conditions. Given the wide differences in financial, scientific, and technological capabilities between developed and developing countries, headline actions must be illustrative and non-exhaustive. We should also bear in mind that redirecting subsidies will not necessarily reduce the need for additional resources, especially in developing countries where subsidy levels have been historically low. A more efficient approach would be to support developing countries in designing innovative financial mechanisms that could engage both the private sector and donor countries, such as payments for environmental services. With reference to possible actions to generate additional resources, there is an urgent need to address biodiversity-related international financial flows, which unfortunately represents a small portion of overall biodiversity funding. While we should engage the private sector, we must not lose sight of obligations under Article 20 of the Convention. We must make sure that Article 20 translates into a specific target for international public biodiversity funding with measurable progress and transparency indicators. Finally, regarding proposals to enhance the efficiency of international development funding, Brazil believes we still need to achieve a more comprehensive understanding of indirect sources in order to ensure the transparency of biodiversity funding. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. I now call on Mexico, followed by Uganda and Argentina. Mexico, you have the floor.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Madam Chair, we thank the expert panel for the production of the analyses and reports to assess the structure, the contents, and the effectiveness of the resource mobilization strategy. Mexico recognizes the urgency of resource mobilization as a fundamental element to achieve fulfillment of the goals of the post-2020 framework and understand the relevance of strategic orientation of resources. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, we require resilient recovery and restructuring that is based on a new ecological awareness and which incentivizes all sectors to ensure sustainable development. This is a unique opportunity to reframe new policies, operational guidelines, and innovative mechanisms that promote public-private partnerships, responsible co-funding, and more efficient use of official development assistance, both bilaterally and multilaterally. We agree with Georgia that in accordance with the expert panel, the post-2020 global framework's resource mobilization activities should focus on the following. First of all, to reduce or redirect resources that cause harm to biodiversity. Secondly, generate additional resources from all sources. And thirdly, to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the use of public resources and resources from other sources. The above requires that the new post-2020 framework should be quantitatively clear and have specific deadlines for this mobilization, combined with support from the creation of national environmental funds. Mexico is in favor of closing the biodiversity and climate action funding gap, fostering cross-cutting long-term investments with production sectors, and highlighting the mainstreaming of biodiversity as a priority in our economic and development plans. At the same time, we must guarantee resources to drive forward with the incorporation of traditional knowledge, a human rights-based approach, and the well-being of the most vulnerable communities. Finally, we reiterate the importance of ensuring that the resource mobilization strategy is approved at the same time as the post-2020 framework if we wish to ensure achievement of these new targets. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mexico. Uganda, followed by Argentina and Norway. Uganda, you have the floor.
Good afternoon to you and good morning to you all. Thank you, Madam Chair. Uganda aligns itself with the statement from Kenya on behalf of Africa and notes that document CBD/SBI/3/5-3 provides sufficient guidance on the draft resource mobilization components of post-2020 biodiversity framework as a follow-up on the current strategy of resource mobilization. The implementation of the post-2020 targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework should be matched with the level of financial resources needed. Synergies among environmental agreements can contribute to resources mobilized, as well as pooling resources for better outcomes, impacts, especially through multifocal area projects involving different MEAs. In line with the establishment of the Land Degradation Neutral Fund and the Green Climate Fund, there is a need to establish a similar complementary fund for biodiversity. In conclusion, Uganda supports elements of the draft recommendations that would make the following additions to the recommendations. Under E, emphasizing the importance of increasing the mobilization of financial resources from all sources and making resources available in a timely manner for the effective implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Secondly, under national finance plans, invites the biofin of the UNDP in collaboration with other relevant and interested organizations and initiatives, as well as the Executive Secretary, to refine the existing methodology of the biofin for the preparation of the national biodiversity finance plans in all countries, along with technical financial modalities for the deployment of this methodology adopted to the circumstances and capacities of the countries, and to support parties that have developed their national biodiversity plans to implement them. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. Argentina, followed by Norway and Canada. Argentina, please raise your hand. Argentina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Señora Presidenta, ante todo queremos
Chair, first of all, we wish to point out that this statement is provisional and informal in nature and does not imply adoption of a position on the documents that will be discussed at the formal in-person SBI-3 meeting. Turning to this item on the agenda, we would like to make the following comments on the documents and the proposed recommendations. Argentina is making significant budgetary efforts to make progress to achieve the CBD's objectives, such as our National Fund for the Enhancement and Conservation of Native Forests, that supports the conservation, sustainable use, and restoration of these native forests. This is an effort based on solidarity between national, provincial, and municipal governments, but it is a solitary effort. External funding does not exceed 4% of the total investment in biodiversity, and a considerable portion of this amount comes from loans rather than donations or non-reimbursable contributions. We appreciate the value of involving private finance in this challenge to mobilise resources in favour of biodiversity. However, we think that this is a process that will take years, but the time is now. On the other hand, private funding and blended finance cannot in any way replace the commitments undertaken by developed countries, since it is the states that ensure the common good, whereas the private sector has the legitimate aim to generate profits. Madam Chair, we are in favour of a realistic, ambitious post-2020 framework that should go hand in hand with means of implementation proportional to this ambition, in particular as regards financial support. We have learned from our experience with HE targets. Therefore, we believe that we need to build a true Marshall Plan for solidarity-based biodiversity, funded by developed countries to support developing countries, and this should be in keeping with the provisions of Article 20 of the CBD and Principle 7 of the Rio Declaration on Common but Differentiated Responsibilities. In this respect, and in order to close this gap, there should be contributions from developed countries that need to be quantified to achieve full implementation of the post-2020 framework, as well as the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Argentina. Norway, followed by Canada and South Africa. Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Stockholm. Resource mobilization is an important component of the post-2020 framework. We welcome the substantial work that has been done from the expert group established at COP14 and of other groups and initiatives. This will provide a better basis for a decision on resource mobilization post-2020 compared to what was available when agreeing on the Aichi targets in 2010. We would especially refer to the TNC Paulson report on financing nature that was published last fall and the Dasgupta report published this February. Both reports present new insights on how to close the gap for biodiversity financing by engaging the finance sector. We need to use public money wisely and to engage the private sector properly if we are to bend the curve of biodiversity loss. The cultural and aspirational valuation of biodiversity is as needed as economic calculations. We need to mobilize resources from all sources and eliminate, reduce, or redirect harmful subsidies. We believe parties that have not already done so should screen harmful subsidies as a first step. The draft recommendation poses several innovative suggestions that needs further consideration. We note the suggestion that all countries are to prepare national finance strategies based on the national biodiversity action plans, develop new incentives for biodiversity protection, and ensure more efficient use of resources. The focus of resource mobilization should be on how to raise and use resources to achieve the goals and targets of the post-2020 framework. Transparent reporting on finance is important, but we should aim for simple and efficient reporting frameworks and focus our resources on what is needed for implementation. Norway underlines the importance of resource mobilization from all sources within the scope of Article 20 of the Convention. We support the strengthening of synergies between the three Rio Conventions. Nature-based solutions is important for both climate mitigation and adaptation, but the effect is dependent on the biodiversity components to be properly taken into account. The GEF has a special role to play as the financial instrument of all three Rio Conventions, in addition to the Stockholm Conventions. Biodiversity, including international waters, is the main focal area of GEF 7. We are looking forward to discuss the priority of biodiversity in the upcoming replenishment negotiations for GEF 8. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Norway. I now give the floor to Canada, followed by South Africa and Switzerland. Canada, you have the floor.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to others. Canada thanks the Secretariat for preparing the meeting documents. Canada believes that the level of resources should be commensurate with the level of ambition for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Like others, we welcome the report of the panel of experts and support their proposed three-pronged approach as a good basis for discussion. We emphasize the importance the experts and parties stress on mobilizing resources from all sources at all levels, including public and private, innovative financing, and partnerships and synergies with climate financing. An ambitious global biodiversity framework requires aiming at a single resource mobilization goal and target supported by high-quality products and processes, such as a resource mobilization strategy, a financial reporting framework, and possibly national financial plans. Canada believes that we need to focus on a simple, practical decision on resource mobilization for COP15. Meeting Document 5 lays out the key elements. We have a number of written comments and questions on the document, and, as always, a robust discussion among parties will be necessary to reach agreement. We are willing to take all opportunities to work together, formally and informally, to develop and adopt a strong decision at COP15. We regard the proposed updated resource mobilization strategy in Annex 2 as a good starting point. However, in keeping with our overall view of a limited set of targets, Canada does not believe that additional post-2020 targets proposed in Annex 1 are needed. Rather, they could be considered in Annex 2. We are supportive of an updated and streamlined financial reporting framework. Parties need to consider lessons learned from the current reporting framework and how it could be improved as part of a process to build a successor. Canada therefore suggests the creation of a technical expert group to assist these efforts. We do have concerns over the numerous additional actions proposed to be undertaken by the Executive Secretary in Document 5. And we're supportive in principle of proposed national financial plans, but would like more information to suggest that the discussion take place under Agenda Item 9, along with other planning, reporting, and review issues. On the financial mechanism, Canada strongly supports the Global Environment Facility as the financial mechanism for the Convention. We are, however, disappointed that Meeting Document 6 and Addendums 2 and 3 were made available so late that we were unable to provide substantive comments. We are particularly concerned because, due to pandemic-related delays, the COP input will not be provided until after GEF 8 replenishment negotiations are well underway. Canada will provide all of our suggestions in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Canada. I now give the floor to South Africa, followed by Switzerland and Ecuador. South Africa, if you raise your hand. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. South Africa supports the statement made by Kenya on behalf of Africa. South Africa knows the conclusions and elements of the draft recommendation. South Africa supports the element of the key messages as outlined on document CBD/SBI/3/5/ADD.2, and they form the basis of our current discussion. South Africa agrees that the current level of ambition for conserving biodiversity and using it sustainably is clearly not sufficient, and failure to raise adequate resources for effectively implementing the ambitious global biodiversity framework will have a significant global economic impact, not only for the current generation, but for future generations. Ladies and gentlemen, it is worth noting that the biodiversity framework is not only relevant to addressing the rates of biodiversity loss, but it is a significant tool which is also used in our commitment under the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as generating significant economic net benefit. Having said that, South Africa agrees to the importance of increasing the mobilization of financial resources, which can be achieved through the establishment of a dedicated global biodiversity fund to mobilize additional resources to implement our ambitious post-2020 GBF. Madam Chair, in consideration of the draft resource mobilization component of the post-2020 GBF, which presents us with the draft elements of possible successor to the current strategy for resource mobilization, the present document is still insufficient to meet the required ambition under GBF, and it didn't take into account some of the suggested elements discussed during the OEWG2 as per COP 14/22. It is worth noting that the resource mobilization strategy should take into account the draft implementation plan of the Cartagena Protocol as well. South Africa supports that an assessment of the financial needs for the 8th replenishment of the GEF Trust Fund GEF 8, which is currently underway. SA also note that the assessment will take into account the latest national reports, national biodiversity strategies and action plans, and the financial reports. And we would like to suggest that it takes into account some of the suggested elements to include a dedicated window to support the effective implementation of protocols as they are unique legal entities and contribute to the overall objectives of the convention. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. I now give the floor to Switzerland, followed by Ecuador. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you. Okay, there were some initial problems. Madam Chair, dear colleagues, Switzerland would like to express its appreciation to the panel of experts for the very helpful reports which focus on 4 key concepts. 1 is mobilizing additional resources, 2, doing less harm, 3, increasing the effectiveness, and 4, aligning all financial flows with a net positive biodiversity development. In our view, these 4 concepts will all have to be reflected in an ambitious outcome. Switzerland recognizes the overall importance of resource mobilization and is glad to report today that we had achieved the doubling of our international biodiversity finance from public and private sources. Switzerland has also significantly reduced its domestic biodiversity funding gap, including by applying the above-mentioned 4 key concepts of the panel of experts. In this sense, Switzerland strongly believes that any target speaking to the mobilization of resources should always include all sources, public and private, and should always have an international and a domestic component. In line with this broad understanding of resource mobilization, Switzerland would like to anchor a new global goal speaking to the alignment of financial flows with net positive biodiversity development, ensuring the increasing resilience of people and nature. Anchoring the overarching goal will speak to the broader financial flows, has the potential to have a significant impact on shifting trillions for the benefit of nature. We should not miss this opportunity to set an ambitious goal as well as giving a clear signal to the financial world. While the target on means of implementation should be commensurate with the ambitions of the framework, Switzerland is of the opinion that qualitative target which will also include a focus on national resource mobilization strategies and implementation plans, will lead to a much higher ambition than a purely numerical target. Therefore, Switzerland does not support a numerical target. In addition, any target working with a baseline like the past doubling target will punish those who have been ambitious in the past and might lead us to lose focus on achieving an ambitious agreement overall. Switzerland concurs that reducing or redirecting resources causing harm to biodiversity is a crucial component of resource mobilization and believes any target in this regard should not be limited to most harmful subsidies but cover all harmful subsidies. A limitation to the scope would be a step backwards. Finally, regarding procedure, the current draft recommendations foresee the agreement of goals and targets on means of implementation at the same time as adopting the revised strategy on resource mobilization. However, Switzerland believes it would be more useful to first focus on defining and agreeing on goals and then on a later step to adopt a strategy on resource mobilization at COP16. We will submit these additional proposed changes to the draft element and on resource mobilization for the possible inclusion in the post-2020 GBF in writing at the formal SBI-3 meeting. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. And I now give the floor to Ecuador. If you please raise your hand, you have the floor.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ecuador. Thanks the GRULAC statement made by Antigua Barbuda and also the Secretariat's important work on resource mobilization and on financial mechanism and also the work done by the expert panel. We believe that these efforts need to continue over the long term with international contributions to biodiversity to help developing countries so that we can have correct implementation of the post-2020 framework. So we take note of the Annex 1 in SBI 3/5, and we also reiterate the specific challenges of certain countries, developing countries that have got high populations and where the pandemic has really exacerbated our challenges. Sorry. So I was saying that on this subject, we have to remember the challenges of certain developing low-income countries that have got some of the highest populations in the countries. And in many cases, the pandemic has exacerbated these challenges of inequalities and has created new vulnerabilities and has really meant that we've taken a step back in terms of progress on sustainable development. At the same time, we also welcome the efforts to identify elements for a possible alternative focus in terms of resource mobilization, as we see in Annex 2 of SBI 3/5. However, we think that in the text we have to include the Real Declaration principles and in particular the common but differentiated responsibilities principle and also Article 20 and 21 of the CDB. These principles are not just reference points, but they need to be guidance for implementation of the new framework, in particular when it comes to the differentiated capacity to implement of the members because of their different economic and financial circumstances. And then when it comes to the financial mechanism, we need to highlight the measuring of the effectiveness of these instruments by periodic monitoring and evaluation of these resources. Resource mobilization means that there has to be a multidimensional commitment. So Ecuador is ready to move forward with the implementation of means that will allow us to actually achieve the post-2020 framework. So we have a constitutional legal framework which has an implementing regulation to ensure that we have a healthy, well-balanced environment and which also protects nature. And we have our NBSAP to implement all of this. And Ecuador's final position will be shared at the formal meeting of the SBI-3 so that we can make progress on this important topic and meet all of the indicators and targets set for 2030. Thank you very much.
That is the end of my list from yesterday. If any other party would like to take the floor, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list. When I give you the floor, Your microphone will be activated, the status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. I see Guatemala on my list, followed by Colombia. Guatemala, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Guatemala supports the Antigua and Barbuda statement that was made on behalf of GULAC on this important subject on the agenda. Increasing resource mobilization from all sources and mobilization of resources at national and an international level, and from the private sector, and also the recognition and the valuation and the strengthening of the contributions made by IPLCs through collective actions are a fundamental point for implementing the new framework for biodiversity post-2020. When it comes to Annex 1, which we see in SBI 3/5, we observe that the subject of the contributions of IPLCs has not been considered in the suggested targets for resource mobilization. Thus, we consider that these contributions need to be fully recognized and valued. That is why we are requesting that they need to be included within the resource mobilization targets. Turning now to the target-related international financial contributions, Guatemala thinks that we need to establish ambitious targets that will allow us to increase resource mobilization for developing countries. And we need to increase the commitments that are undertaken in the resource mobilization targets that were adopted in Decision 3 at COP12. And we will present by writing these recommendations at the formal SBI meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guatemala. Any more parties who wish to speak? No, I see no more requests from parties for the floor. We now move to interventions from non-parties. No, I see no non-parties. I would now like to open the floor for interventions by representatives of the major stakeholder groups. Please note, each statement should not exceed 5 minutes. On behalf of the IPLCs, Daniel Coupe from IIN. Yes, you had the floor. IIN. Please activate your microphone. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm speaking on behalf of the IFP. Indigenous people have been partnered with the parties in the CBD as partners and right holders in safeguarding and protecting our lands, waters, and territories, leading to biodiversity outcomes. Reports have shown that recognizing tenure of indigenous people is a low-cost and high-benefit investment for both biodiversity and climate benefits, even potentially achieving at least equivalent outcome with protected areas. We therefore request parties to consider these findings in light of the discussion and resource mobilization. On financial reporting, the development of resource mobilization framework should include reporting indicator on the number of public-private partnership and ABS agreement entered into with IPLCs and include feedback mechanism for IPLCs assessment results. On IBES Global Assessment Report, we recognize that while nature is generally declining less rapidly in indigenous peoples' lands, our lands also face increasing pressure from other sectors. As protecting indigenous tenure can be cost-effective, resource mobilization should ensure that biodiversity financing should avoid negative impacts to ecosystems. Biodiversity and people in the elements of the post-2020 biodiversity framework. And in addition, the post-20 should be ensure fair and equitable benefit sharing with IPLC in relation to resource mobilization. We remind that the scope of IPLC contribution to the conservation and the subsequent level of resource mobilization required to support these efforts should not be limited to traditional knowledge data, but also indigenous technologies as recognized in Article 84 of the Convention. As such, FPIC is a prerequisite for the sharing and use of traditional knowledge. Joint processing with IPLCs will need to be developed for appropriate decision making regarding the implementation of traditional knowledge and feedback mechanism required by IPLCs to ensure traditional knowledge is being used appropriately on ongoing basis. On success of current strategy, we know that strategy invites and encourages private sector investment that may result in a flow in biodiversity public-private partnership in high conservation areas inhabited by IPLCs. Therefore, equitable governance, full and effective participation of IPLCs, as well as equitable distribution of resources should be ensured in draft strategy to strengthen effective and meaningful partnership. We also know that draft synergy treats traditional knowledge and conservation as in-kind contribution. Our finance, we emphasize the need for budgets include allocation for IPLC's activities that contribute to conservation biodiversity. Furthermore, the full effective participation of IPLC women and youth is indeed a national biodiversity finance, including COVID-19 recovery plans that impact biodiversity and people for transformative, inclusive, and equitable action as stated in Article 20. On synergy among conventions, we invite parties to consider developing the same mechanism as in the Indigenous People Policy developed by Green Climate Fund to ensure the right of indigenous peoples are safeguarded, investment for diversity, sustainable development, and climate action investment. In addition, we reiterate that the call of its access of the Global Environmental Facility Fund and other funds for relevant for biodiversity conservation in order for IPLCs to be supported in their contribution to CBD. Finally, we recommend that there should be a specific funding for supporting IPLC-led conservation, including both access to international finance, allocation within national budgets that can be directly accessed by IPLC at all levels. This is important activity and local collective action by IPLC that contribute to the achievement of post-2020 global biodiversity framework and 2050 vision, including capacity development, support, and full effective participation of IPLC in all CPD processes and its protocol. We thank you and will submit the next in the comments in writing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, IPLC. On behalf of women's organizations, I have on my list here women organization representative from FARN. If you raise your hand, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning. Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the CBD Women Caucus. We welcome all documents prepared for this agenda item, and we thank the support of the Secretariat to attend the thematic workshop on resource mobilization for the post-2020 GBF, which was held in Berlin in January 2020. The document prepared on resource mobilization and Annex 2, report of the panel of experts on resource mobilization, among others, correctly state that it is strategic to eliminate harmful incentives that cause biodiversity loss and redirect those investments to biodiversity protection. However, the latter report is largely gender blind. It does not include women, including youth, indigenous peoples, and local communities, nor women's organizations, which are key actors in the mobilization of resources and capacity building for biodiversity protection. Policy reforms and advocacy should aim at eliminating harmful incentives that destroy local ecosystems, biodiversity, and women's livelihoods, including subsidies to fossil fuels and the promotion of extractive activities such as monoculture tree plantations, industrial, agriculture and livestock, and large-scale infrastructure. Policies also should eliminate harmful taxes, trade, and investment that currently lead to tax avoidance and illicit financial flows, land grabs, and violations of labor rights. Governments should adopt policies that redistribute wealth, power, and resources, and recognize women's needs and roles as biodiversity caretaker agents. Then can we move towards a gender-just economy? Resources should be mobilized to assess and document the impact of the lack of resource mobilization for capacity building of women, including youth, indigenous peoples, and local communities, on biodiversity conservation and sustainable use, as well as benefit sharing. Resources should be also allocated to recovering and value traditional local knowledge and the role of women in the conservation and governance of biodiversity. It also requires building on the existing knowledge of best practices of grassroots and indigenous women and their communities, recognizing and supporting their contributions to effective and efficient resource utilization that contributes not only to biodiversity conservation, but also to the conservation and restoration of ecosystems, food sovereignty, and sustainable community livelihoods. This includes the locally owned, women-led, and climate-resilient best practices such as small-scale agroecological, forest, and energy solutions. We are not seeing sufficient and bold gender considerations in the financial mechanism documents. This must be addressed. We recall that GEF has strong gender safeguards and its gender guidelines are fully applicable for its implementing agencies. GEF also has an indigenous peoples policy. We are confident that this would lead to reinforcing the gender considerations of the post-2020 GBF with this regard. Both resource mobilization and the financial mechanism carried out through inclusive, integrated, and holistic processes can be effective in recognizing human rights and access rights. Moving to the all of society approach will eliminate discriminatory social norms, break down structural barriers, and gender stereotypes. Strategies and action must match commitments to gender equality with adequate financing, which will strengthen a wide range of stakeholders and institutions to promote gender equality, harness the potential of technology and innovation to improve the lives of women, regularly collect, analyze, and use gender data and statistics, and promote international cooperation to implement commitments to gender equality. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, women. I continue my list with the representative of Global Youth Biodiversity Network. Speaking for youth, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. There is a simple truth here. The success of any framework or implementation plan, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework included, will stand or fall depending on our ability to mobilize resources. In the past 12 months, we have seen what can be possible to be achieved if our political leaders realize the life-threatening urgency of a situation and act accordingly. 21 trillion US dollars have been mobilized in the past 12 months by governments and central banks to protect our economies from COVID-19. This figure shows us that a lot can be done when there is political will. But we wonder, where was this political will in the last 10 years? Biodiversity is the very basis of our livelihoods, of our economies, culture, identity, and our future. Is this less important than saving our economies? Distinguished delegates, we need to mobilize all our efforts in breaking with business as usual when it comes to resource mobilization. Otherwise, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will not reach very far, and we will meet again in 10 years to find out that little has really changed. We're calling on you to take urgent action, especially in the following areas. First, we need a strict time-bound action plan to eliminate subsidies that are harmful to biodiversity once and for all by 2030. This must be done through a just transition that addresses local and global inequalities in political power and access to resources. This needs to be reflected in the proposals presented under this item. We also call on parties to reject voluntary approaches with regards to the elimination of harmful subsidies, as these have up to now shown little success in slowing global biodiversity loss and have not addressed the underlying drivers of it. We instead urge parties to take strong regulatory action to establish globally coordinated legal frameworks to ensure that businesses, including financial institutions, transition to fairer and more sustainable practices and divest from biodiversity harmful investments. This must also ensure that trade and investment agreements have strict social and environmental safeguards and do not have provisions that undermine CBD objectives, as well as wider human, indigenous, and peasant rights. Such a regulatory approach should also include both incentives and sanctions for non-compliance. Second, we're deeply concerned about the situation of public budgets in a post-COVID world, particularly in developing countries. Already, the accumulation of public debt is spiraling out of control in many countries, placing a huge burden on future generations and further diminishing the availability of crucial domestic resources for the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We therefore urge parties that are in a creditor position to allow for payment relief on debt as well as to restructure and cancel debt based on transparent biodiversity conservation performance indicators, giving developing countries the fiscal breathing space to implement the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in an equitable and socially just manner. In this context, we also support calls to request SBI to undertake a study on the relationship between debt, austerity, and the CBD implementation, with a view of removing specific impediments to CBD implementation and informing future work on resource mobilization mechanism. We support the proposal for an establishment of national resource mobilization plans and nationally determined targets. We further wish to emphasize the importance of a whole-of-government approach in resource mobilization and the critical importance of robust baselines for resource mobilization. Finally, we consider it is crucial to recognize that financial support for IPLCs is not commensurate with the contributions to sustainable use and conservation of biodiversity. It is critical to mobilize more adequate financial resources to support IPLCs. Distinguished delegates, the last 10 years offer a lot of lessons learned when it comes to resource mobilization, and the last 12 months have shown us that we can overcome seemingly giant obstacles. We ask you to break with business as usual and to use the same spirit when we talk about resource mobilization towards a sustainable and equitable future in harmony with nature. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Youth. On behalf of CBD Alliance, on my list I have CBD Alliance. Don't know if it's Third World Network or who should speak for CBD Alliance. Please raise your hand. Third World Network, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm making this statement on behalf of the CBD Alliance, which gathers a diverse range of views and proposals from civil society. The international financial architecture is currently stacked against living in harmony with nature. private and public capital have accelerated biodiversity loss and concentrated power among elites. International trade and financial rules, huge inequalities in wealth, high debts, and pervasive austerity are the primary drivers that lead to extraction of natural resources. Pouring investment into biodiversity without addressing extractivism is a recipe for planetary ruin and further human rights abuses. Genuine transformative change is required, including debt cancellation, international taxation, and full accountability for financial and other corporations. Governments should end the debt austerity nexus that fuels extractivism and impedes CBD implementation. We also cannot continue to tolerate complete policy incoherence. As long as the parties to the CBD spend 4 to 6 trillion US dollars annually on subsidies that promote biodiversity loss, it makes a mockery of resource mobilization for biodiversity conservation. Too many governments, with one hand, spend some money on biodiversity, but with the other, spend multiple times more on perverse incentives. Perverse incentives have to be phased out and redirected. This was already mandated by the Aichi targets, but failed so far, despite its economic advantages. A recent report by the Global Forest Coalition, with local case studies, concludes that the main obstacle to perverse incentive reform is the corporate capture of policy making, because large corporations benefit most from harmful subsidies. It is essential that the CBD and the GEF avoid all forms of corporate capture. This includes phasing out private-public partnerships that create financial dependencies on private sector interests. We also call on governments to reject blended finance and public-private partnerships that socialize losses and privatize gains. The panel of experts on resource mobilization points out the importance of reducing the pressure on biodiversity by addressing the root causes of biodiversity loss, such as overconsumption in industrialized countries. Less pressure means that less money is needed to act against these pressures, providing an important way to make sufficient resources available. Meanwhile, in 2019, the biggest private banks spent at least $260 billion in private investments that harm biodiversity, particularly in agro-industry and its unsustainable livestock farming sector. Strict legislation to redirect these investments are a priority. Ecosystems would not need to be restored if they were not deliberately destroyed by agro-industry or unsustainable use, but recognition and gender-responsive support to community conservation initiatives and related sustainable livelihood options of local communities and indigenous peoples are needed. Their land governance and tenure rights have to be recognized. Industries known to damage biodiversity and the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities and women have to be penalized. Resource mobilization is key to the implementation of the post-2020 GBF, but it must be within the context of Article 20 of the Convention and the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. Resource mobilization and GEF resources must be focused on support for ongoing stewardship and legal and political rights of IPLCs, women and smallholder producers, who are the ones conserving and sustainably using biodiversity. We caution against reliance on innovative financial mechanisms because serious challenges to market-based instruments remain, such as more intensive environmental harm and ongoing land rights violations. We are very concerned about the hype over nature-based solutions because this is used by fossil fuel emitters to offset emissions while continuing emitting. Money provided for offsetting cannot be considered to be biodiversity funding. It is merely money that attempts to rebuild what has been destroyed and will likely fail in that task too. We've tried all the market-based and voluntary approaches since Rio, but they have clearly failed. Now is the time for far-reaching political economic reforms and strong public investment which can be generated through redistribution of wealth by time-tested means, taxes and payments for ecological debt. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, CBD Alliance. On behalf of subnational and local governments, Clay, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Honourable Chairs, Co-Chairs and distinguished delegates, I address you on behalf of the Advisory Committee on Subnational Governments, coordinated by Regions 4 and the Government of Quebec, ECLI, Local Governments for Sustainability, the group of leading subnational governments towards the Aichi biodiversity targets, the European Committee of the Regions, and the Edinburgh Process partners. Our constituency welcomes the whole of government, society, and economy approach to resource mobilization, as this resonates with local and subnational governments' ambitions. We believe this approach is necessary for transformative, inclusive, and equitable change. Parties should empower and encourage their local and subnational governments to review and reform their fiscal policies and budgets in order to result in no net harm to biodiversity and promote biodiversity mainstreaming across all sectors. Local and subnational governments can play a key role in applying safeguards to their budgets and procurement practices. Many have introduced incentives and disincentives, and parties should encourage and support more widespread application of such measures at these levels as part of their scaling up plans. We congratulate the Global Environment Facility on its Sustainable Cities Impact Program and are pleased to see it is growing. But we recognize that the GEF and this program cannot meet the needs of all cities. Therefore, we appeal for more and other types of mechanisms to be set up by other funds to finance biodiversity conservation and ecosystem restoration at the local and subnational levels. We welcome the recommendations on national biodiversity finance plans. These plans should reflect local and subnational governments' share in total public expenditure on biodiversity and nature. And parties should support and encourage their local and subnational governments to develop biodiversity finance plans and to incorporate financial solutions that incentivize the protection of nature and prevent further loss of biodiversity. We remain committed to engaging in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework process, and we look forward to further discussions and continuing the good work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this ends my list of major stakeholder groups. Now I invite other observers to take the floor. Please note to limit your intervention to 3 minutes. And I see UNEP CMS on my list. You have the floor. CMS, you have the floor. You have to
you have to activate your mic and your camera from the upper left hand. Thanks.
Maybe meanwhile we can continue with TNC first and then come back to CMS. TNC, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I am speaking on behalf of BirdLife International, Conservation International, the Nature Conservancy, the Wildlife Conservation Society, and WWF. A holistic approach to resource mobilization is essential for the successful implementation of the post-2020 framework. Therefore, resource mobilization needs to cover both new funding and the elimination of financial flows that harm biodiversity. This approach has also been recommended by the panel of experts on resource mobilization. As shown by the Financing Nature report, the global annual financing gap for biodiversity is $700 billion. Closing this gap will require major efforts by all parties, including an increase in concessional flows to developing countries. But even doubling current levels of ODA, while significant and urgently needed, would only close 1% of the gap. Unlocking private sector finance, provided that adequate safeguards are in place, represents another vital opportunity for mobilizing additional financial resources. Document SBI-3/5 provides recommendations on elements of resource mobilization to be reflected in the post-2020 framework. We believe the document addresses resource mobilization from a holistic point of view, filling significant gaps in the updated Zero draft. Key recommendations include: 1, the need to address fiscal and budgetary coherence across all sectors, including harmful subsidies and other incentives. National level policy reform to improve regulatory frameworks, incentivize positive flows, and redirect negative incentives is critical to unlock additional private and public finance flows at scale. Number 2, including the role and responsibility of the financial services sector and financial institutions. Biodiversity loss cannot be halted and reversed without addressing the structural deficiency of private financial markets to incorporate biodiversity. 3, nationally determined targets for domestic resource mobilization. And 4, national biodiversity finance plans to meet those targets. These recommendations should be better addressed in the framework to reflect the level of ambition needed to reverse biodiversity loss. In addition, we believe the need for increased capacity building and scientific and technological transfer requires more emphasis in the GBF. Success will require a combination of increasing the flow of positive financing and a simultaneous elimination or realignment of all harmful financial flows, both public and private, and improving the efficiency of all existing resources. We will be submitting a more detailed position paper for parties' consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. I now go back to the CMS. If CMS would like to speak, no?
They're not online right now.
Okay.
So maybe we go to the World Bank and then try and come back to CMS. Thanks.
Thank you. The World Bank Group, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The World Bank welcomes the comprehensive work done by the expert group on resource mobilization and the recommendations provided. This statement seeks to address the request for inputs put forth in document CBD/SBI-3/4 by the co-chairs of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and is based on recent work undertaken by the World Bank and the International Finance Corporation on mobilizing private finance for nature, and an upcoming report on the economic case for nature, which uses state-of-the-art modeling tools to provide new evidence on the cost of inaction and the benefits of a global deal for nature. With respect to needs, it is important to stress that implementing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will not only generate costs, but will also generate economic benefits. This should be recognized up front so that the framework could be brought to the attention of ministers of finance more effectively. In fact, our modeling work shows that globally coordinated policies, such as the repurposing of subsidies or the scaling up of global forest carbon payment schemes, can generate ecological and economic win-wins. The model also sheds light on the cost of inaction when a selected number of ecosystem tipping points are reached as a result of continued loss of biodiversity, pointing at a very high financial toll, particularly for low-income countries. With respect to sources of funds, analysis conducted by the World Bank and the IFC argues that the financial sector has a critical role to play in addressing the global biodiversity crisis, as it can drive investment and corporate decision-making, and that governments and financial regulators hold the key to creating the appropriate enabling conditions to drive nature-smart investment. The World Bank suggests that the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework includes an explicit role for financial institutions to play in aligning global financial flows with the targets set in the framework. We stand ready to support CBD parties in measuring and harnessing the value of biodiversity and ecosystem services. As such, we remain committed to the IDA 19 target to support the revision and implementation of NBSAPs in at least 15 low-income countries. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, World Bank Group. I now come back to UNEP CMS. You had the floor.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Apologies, I'm sorry. Thank you for the floor. The Secretariat of the Convention on Migratory Species, also known as CMS, welcomes the work of the CBD Secretariat and others with respect to Agenda Item 6 on the financial mechanism, as detailed in the documents of the meeting. CMS is particularly pleased to see that the advice of the CMS Standing Committee on the national priorities for the implementation of CMS for the aid replenishment of the Global Environmental Facility has been included in the documentation of the third meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation. Work to develop the CBD's advice to the GEF on the 4-year programmatic framework will necessarily take place only following the SBI-3 meeting. Therefore, we recommend that the draft decision regarding this process makes specific reference to the advice from the other biodiversity-related conventions in relation to further work on the development of the GEF-8 4-year programmatic framework. To this end, we suggested changes to the draft decision, which are contained in the statement we uploaded in the system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, CMS. And I now give the floor to Yuan Jungtad. You had the floor. Maybe you need to activate your microphone. Upper left corner.
Umtad, please activate your mic and camera on the upper left corner under device settings. Otherwise, we won't be able to hear or see you. Thanks.
No, it doesn't seem to work.
Yeah.
Okay, but if so, I think that I have no more requests for the floor on this agenda item. So, colleagues, we have now reached the conclusion of our discussions on item 6 on resource mobilization and the financial mechanism. Thank you, delegates, for sharing your views. As previously explained, there will be no conference room papers stemming from this informal session. Together with the Secretariat, I will prepare a short procedure report on the informal session, noting the parties and observers that have made interventions. Colleagues, we will now take a 15-minute break. Please retain your connection during the break. There is no need to log off. We will reconvene at, please, Secretariat. You have to help me.
8:40 Montreal time. 8:40 Montreal time. So about 16 minutes from now.
Okay.
Thanks.
8:40 Montreal time. So we will continue then with the next agenda item, item 7, capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication. Have a nice break. our meeting. We now turn to item 7 on capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication. I will now request the secretariat to introduce the documents for item 7. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pursuant to decisions 1424, 1425, and 1426, the Executive Secretary has prepared the following official documents to assist the subsidiary body in the consideration of this agenda item. Document SBI-3/7 on capacity development, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, provides in section 2 a preliminary final report on the implementation of the short-term action plan 2017 to 2020 to enhance and support capacity building for the implementation of the convention and its protocols, and also introduces the long-term strategic framework for capacity development. Section 3 provides a summary progress report on technical and scientific cooperation and introduces proposals to strengthen technical and scientific cooperation, as well as proposals for an inclusive process to review and renew technical and scientific cooperation. The last section, section 5 of the document, presents draft elements of a decision on capacity development, technical and scientific cooperation, and technology transfer. Document SBI-3/7 Add 1 presents a detailed version of the long-term strategic framework for capacity development to support the implementation of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Document /7 Add 2 presents the updated draft proposals to strengthen technical and scientific cooperation programs. Document SBI-3/16 presents the evaluation report of the strategic framework for capacity building and development to support implementation of the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing. Draft elements of a decision on capacity building and capacity development to support implementation of the Nagoya Protocol are presented in section 3 of that document. Document SBI-3/8, which has been prepared in response to decision 1425, introduces the draft knowledge management component of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework and presents a short report on the implementation of the program of work for the clearinghouse mechanism, as well as elements for a program of work for the clearinghouse mechanism from the year 2021 add-on. Section 5 of the document provides draft elements of a decision on knowledge management and the clearinghouse mechanism. Document 8 Add 1 presents the draft knowledge management component of the global biodiversity framework. And finally, document 3/9 on communication provides a progress report on the request made to the Executive Secretary in Decision 1426 to develop themes and background materials around which parties and relevant organizations can organize communication and public awareness campaigns on the current status of biodiversity and the preparation of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, as well as progress with the implementation of the communication strategy. Draft elements of a decision on communication are presented in section 8 of the document. The Executive Secretary has also prepared the following information documents for this item. Inf1, which provides an evaluation of the strategic framework for the capacity building and development in support of the Nagoya Protocol. Inf8, which presents the data reporting tool for MES, a tool for biodiversity management, knowledge management in support of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Inf9, which provides a report on of the study to inform the preparation of a long-term framework for capacity building beyond 2020. Inf14, which presents a preliminary final report on the implementation of the short-term action plan for capacity building. Inf15, which provides proposals for an inclusive process to review and renew technical and scientific cooperation programs. Inf16, which provides options for institutional mechanisms to facilitate technical and scientific cooperation. And Inf17, which provides a preliminary list of relevant institutional arrangements and networks for facilitating technical and scientific cooperation at all levels. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I now open the floor for interventions on Agenda Item 7. Before I do that, I will kindly ask all speakers to try to reduce speed or pause between sentences to help our hard-working interpreters. Thank you. Thank you very much. I will now open the floor for statements from the regions. For Africa, I have on my list the Democratic Republic of Congo. If you please raise your hand if you speak for the African region. No? Okay, yes. Yes, you had the floor. Go ahead. Democratic Republic of Congo, please go ahead. You have the floor.
Should we go on and come back to them
yes.
later? Thanks.
We can come back to Congo later. I continue with my list. For the CEE region, I have Georgia. If you please raise your hand. Georgia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of the Central and Eastern European region, I would like to thank for the work undertaken for implementation of the short-term capacity action plan and other components of this agenda item, as well as for preparation of the documents. These issues, while interlinked between each other, form foundation for ensuring implementation of the Convention and directly contribute to achieving our goals and targets. At the same time, translating these plans into reality requires effective cooperation at the global and national level, as well as considerable efforts and resources. Therefore, these components, as all others, are also directly linked to the resource mobilization part of the post-2020 GBF. In general, we support the presented long-term strategic framework for capacity development. And at the same time, we note that capacity development should be stakeholder-driven and based on the needs of the parties. Therefore, we consider assessment of capacity needs for the countries is important to identify gaps and plan the activities in an efficient manner. At the same time, we would like to thank for the preliminary report on implementation of the short-term capacity building action plan and the report of the study to inform the preparation of a long-term strategic framework. We also believe that evaluation of the impacts, outcomes, and effectiveness of the short-term action plan, as outlined in the decision 13/23, is critical to ensure that the long-term capacity building framework builds on lessons learned. In terms of capacity development, we would also highlight the importance of targeting at institutional development over the capacity building for individuals. Annex 2 of the document CBD/SBI/3/7 proposals for an inclusive process to review and renew technical and scientific cooperation programs suggests 3 options for the review process. In this regard, as in case of capacity development, we consider that involvement of parties in this process is key, since they are beneficiaries of the process and have better understanding of national circumstances. In order to keep costs down, the in-person workshops could be substituted by online meetings and workshops as mentioned in the InfDoc 15. Or parties may submit relevant information through online submissions. Participation of the scientific institutions in this process is also critically important. Knowledge management is vital for implementation of the convention. Therefore, we would support the knowledge management component as presented in the documents, while noting that its implementation, on the other hand, will require significant capacity development for parties, especially in relation to knowledge generation, analysis, and introduction of results to relevant stakeholders. We would also like to highlight that the language barrier is a significant challenge in addressing capacity development, knowledge management, or scientific and technical cooperation needs. Finally, proper communication is probably the most important tool for implementation of the GBF. We acknowledge the activities undertaken so far, which have already resulted in increased awareness on biodiversity issues among various target groups, including private sector, and we start seeing some results of those activities. At the same time, we share the outcomes of various consultations held on this issue, particularly highlight that communication should more focus on behavior change rather than celebratory or awareness-raising activities. Therefore, it is important to involve qualified communication specialists and possibly psychologists in this process. In order to achieve even greater tangible results, we consider that the communication should be designed separately for different stakeholders and sectors. It is important to share experience of other successful communication campaigns in addition to the climate change, for instance, concerning the plastic waste or ozone layer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Georgia, speaking on behalf of CE region. I now go back to Democratic Republic of Congo, speaking on behalf of African region. You have the floor.
Allô, Mike?
Oui, je vous entends.
Hello. I can hear you. Please go ahead. No. Have we lost them again?
Non, je suis là, Madame la Présidente.
No, I'm here, Madam Chair. May I continue?
La République démocratique du Congo prend la parole.
Democratic Republic of Congo is taking the floor on behalf of the African group. For Africa, the enabling mechanisms for the implementation of the convention, particularly capacity building and technology transfer, are its priorities. Indeed, this was reaffirmed at the African Ministerial Conference in Sharm el-Sheikh. Thus, audio lost.
Crucial pour la mise en œuvre du...
This is a fundamental issue for the implementation of the future post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Africa welcomes a long-term strategic framework for capacity building beyond 2020. Aligned with the audio lost.
I'm sorry, I think we lost the speaker again.
Cela ne sert à rien de disposer d'un bon...
No audio.
Le renforcement des capacités, des indications claires et précises concernant la manière dont sa mise en œuvre sera financée. Madame la Présidente, l'Afrique prend note des progrès réalisés dans la diversification des modalités et des méthodes d'offrir le soutien au renforcement des capacités par le secrétariat et ses partenaires. Nous soulignons cependant que pour l'Afrique, ces modalités et méthodes
I'm sorry, I think we lost the speaker again.
D'abord, nous soulignons aussi le fait
We also underscore the fact that certain parties are having difficulty taking full advantage of the e-learning tools. In any event, Africa believes that all capacity building and technology transfer initiatives, audio lost.
Pour les partis et par conséquent, la conférence des partis ne devrait pas s'en satisfaire.
The needs of the parties and consequently the conference of the parties should not be satisfied with them. Africa commends the capacity building activities implemented under the BioFin initiative with support from the parties with a view to integrating natural capital accounting into their national accounts so that their policies evolve towards a long-term strategy. Further, Africa, audio lost.
La proposition de commander une évaluation.
Supports the proposal to commission an independent evaluation of the long-term framework, but this evaluation should be performed midterm, that is in 2025, with the final evaluation in 2029, together with the review of the GBF. Africa also supports the creation of the Informal Advisory Group on Technical and Scientific Cooperation. As regards the process to review and renew, audio lost.
Programme de coopération technique et scientifique.
To review and renew technical and scientific cooperation programs, Africa will present its preferences as to the proposed scenarios at the formal SBI-3 meeting. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry it was some interruptions, but there is also, as I understand, written statement on the web page. Thank you very much. I now continue with Portugal, speaking on behalf of EU and its member states. Portugal, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I speak on behalf of European Union and its member states. We underline the importance of this item to support the effective implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Science tells us that we need transformative change. So we need the capacity, technical and scientific cooperation, the knowledge and the communication for such transformative change. We look forward to working with other parties to improve the documents, including before the formal SBI-3. We welcome the draft long-term strategic framework for capacity development and the draft proposal to strengthen technical and scientific cooperation. The EU and its member states support the idea of developing national capacity development plans and related components integrated into the update and development at national level needs to be structurally embedded in relevant organizations and institutions. We support the use and improvement of existing tools, communities of practice, support the networks and the development of interoperability of relevant platforms, welcoming the engagement of private sector. Proposals for new tools need to be evaluated based on their added value. We seek further clarification on the option for institutional arrangement for technical and scientific cooperation, mainly on the selection process, the resource mobilization strategy, including funding solutions, and the defined criteria for the proposed centers. Regarding the capacity development under the Cartagena Protocol and building on our statement under SBI-3 Agenda Item 5, we are convinced that the capacity building can best be addressed with standalone documents. We therefore suggest discussing the capacity building action plan for Cartagena Protocol under a specific agenda item at COP MOP 10. We take note of evaluation of strategic framework for capacity building and development to support the effective implementation of Nagoya Protocol and agree that this strategic framework should be revised in line with the post-2020 GBF, as well as the long-term strategic framework for capacity development. We emphasize the need to adapt future capacity development activities to the ABS elements of the future post-2020 GBF. The EU and its member states welcome the knowledge management component of the post-2020 GBF, with the important role of the clearinghouse mechanism and the clearinghouses. The BioLand tool for national clearinghouse mechanism should be further developed and should include interoperability with the clearinghouse and other information sources. The European Commission and UNEP WCMC are exploring setting up a global knowledge center of biodiversity, notably for tracking progress on target and goals. We invite all to reflect with us on how to best use such a center. We find the communication strategy for the implementation of the post-2020 GBF very important. The role of CBD Secretariat would be in particular to develop a strategic steer and frame for magnifying the communication efforts by all relevant organizations. We are still developing final position on this item as several documents were available only recently. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Portugal, speaking on behalf of EU and its member states. On my list for the regions, is there any more region who would like to speak now? I'm not sure if Argentina will speak for GRULAC or has on a national commitment later on. Okay, I see no raised hand. Then I would like to ask if Singapore would like to speak for the Asian countries. Singapore, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This statement is made on behalf of the 10 member states that comprise the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. ASEAN notes the proposed long-term strategic framework for capacity development to support the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework as in Annex 1 of the document. The ASEAN leaders underscore the importance of capacity building across different sectors, including in biodiversity literacy, climate action, smart cities, and on public health and emergency response. This exemplifies the cross-cutting nature of capacity building and its value in enabling the ASEAN not only to implement the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, but to better adapt to the changing regional and global dynamics. The ASEAN member states, with the support of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, have been scaling up capacity building initiatives in the ASEAN region. Regional efforts to enhance capacity on the effective management of protected areas have been crucial to the achievement of Aichi Target 11. Moreover, the technical and scientific cooperation on urban green infrastructure under the BioBridge initiative spearheaded by Singapore and Thailand is contributing to the development of the ASEAN Work Programme on urban green infrastructure. Other capacity enhancement initiatives include training on developing national clearinghouse mechanisms, as well as on data organization and communication, education, and public awareness. As we continue to implement capacity development, as well as technical and scientific cooperation in the region, the ASEAN welcomes the support of partners for these efforts to continue, scale up, and expand across sectors. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Singapore, speaking on behalf of ASEAN countries. I will now open the floor for interventions by parties. If you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list. When I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated, the status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. I will start to give the floor to Thailand, followed by Japan and Ethiopia. Thailand, you have the floor.
Thailand acknowledges advancement regarding capacity building on scientific and technical issues under the Convention on Biological Diversity, in particular the long-term strategic framework for capacity building beyond 2020, aligned with the draft post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Thailand prioritizes the knowledge management and clearinghouse mechanism to contribute the implementation of the post-2020 GBF. We request secretariat and relevant organizations to strengthen capacity building and provide technical support for developing countries in enhancing the knowledge management and national CHM. Thailand recognizes the capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation should be the integral part of the NBSAP at national level. Furthermore, we support that the multilateral and international cooperation, including North-South and South-South cooperation, which is one of the most important mechanisms to mobilize implementation under the post-2020 GBF based on national priorities and circumstances, and with the sufficient financial and institutional support from related sources. Regard to knowledge management, Thailand welcomes the note by the Executive Secretary on the knowledge management components of the post-2020 GBF, including reports on implementation of the work program for the CHM, contained in SBI's document CBD/SBI/3/8. Thailand recognizes the benefits of the National Ecosystem Assessment Initiative. Thailand is one among the other countries under such initiative. Appreciate support from relevant organizations. Regarding capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, as well as communication, the output from the initiative provided evidence base for biodiversity planning, national reporting, as well as platform for sharing experience with other parties. We will submit our statement on this agenda item to the Secretariat in written. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Thailand. I now give the floor to Japan, followed by Ethiopia and China. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Japan would like to mention 5 points. First, as Japan has been contributing to capacity development for the Aichi targets, we agree that capacity development, together with technical and scientific cooperation, will be important for the post-2020 GBF as well. Now, establishment of new bodies, such as the Biodiversity Capacity Development Forum, is proposed in the document SBI-3/7. In order to avoid duplication of efforts and to increase efficiency, it is necessary to identify what element is missing in discussions on capacity building at regular SBIs or COPs, and then what should be addressed by such additional bodies in the first place. Then, when we consider establishment of such bodies, cost implications should be clarified as well. Secondly, as for capacity building of the Nagoya Protocol in the document SBI-3/16, it is important to adopt and implement domestic ABS measures in accordance with Article 6 and 7 of the Nagoya Protocol, with ensuring legal clarity and certainty, clarity, and transparency in order to achieve an effective implementation of the protocol. In this regard, it is necessary to facilitate publication of the domestic measures on the ABS clearinghouse. Third, regarding capacity building projects, it is effective to collect relevant information and track progress made after completion of each project. Fourth, as for the annex of the document 3/16, we have a comment on paragraph E. Parties are now discussing the DSI issue and have not reached an agreement on whether DSI falls within the scope of the CBD and Nagoya Protocol. Therefore, it is inappropriate for DSI to be included in specific priorities for capacity building at this stage, including the aspect of modus operandi. Before moving on to the consideration, the discussion on the relevance between DSI and ABS should be advanced toward an agreement. In this regard, we'd like to suggest amendment to the text to reflect this point, which we can share with all of you in writing through the Secretariat. Finally, UNUIAS mentioned on Agenda Item 3 that they are now developing a manual for incorporation of landscape approaches into NBSAPs and related policies. Japan acknowledges that the manual will contribute to capacity development for the implementation of the GBF, and we hope the Secretariat will fully take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. And before I continue, I would like once again to remind all delegate speakers to try to speak as in a slowly pace, so make it easier for our interpreters. Thank you very much. I will now continue with Ethiopia, followed by China and Brazil. Ethiopia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you so much. Ethiopia supports statement made by DRC. Ethiopia appreciates and acknowledges the support provided so far by the donating parties and other relevant organizations for capacity development and technical and scientific cooperation doing to assist, particularly developing country parties and IPLCs over years since the adoption of Convention on Biological Diversity and its protocols. When the implementation status of the three objectives of the CBD is concerned, it doesn't seem to be satisfactory as envisaged. Thus, the implementation in achieving these objectives remain limited. The decline in biological diversity continued, assisted by various driving forces. Inter alia, population pressure, poverty, and climate change in areas where biological diversity is situated. This shows the importance of capacity development, technical and scientific cooperation, and technology transfer. One, to halt the negative impacts as faced on the globe. Two, to effectively implement post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Three, to enhance the effective implementation of ABS and the Nagoya Protocol for financing for biodiversity. Fourth, to enhance capacity building action plan for the implementation of Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. Fifth, to align capacity development strategies, mechanisms, programs, and action plans to biodiversity-related conventions and other multilateral environmental agreements and processes. Six, to offer financial and technical support in order to enable developing country parties to design and implement capacity development programs, including NBSAPs. Seven, to support academia and other relevant institutions to integrate biodiversity issues, particularly the post-2020 biodiversity framework, into their educational curricula. Eighth, and the last, to promote the development of appropriate biodiversity-related technologies and innovations with the involvement of IPLC solutions. Finally, Ethiopia supports the establishment of operative and acceptable global technical and scientific support center for biodiversity and as appropriate of the regional support center or organization as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ethiopia. I will now give the floor to China, followed by Brazil and Norway. China, you have the floor.
The secretariat to provide detailed information. Last audio. Interpreter lost audio.
I think we lost China. China, are you still online? No? China, you need to activate your microphone. Okay, I think I continue with Brazil and then go back to China. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It is a pleasure to see you again. I will make some preliminary comments on behalf of Brazil on this agenda item, and our official position will be presented at the formal face-to-face meeting. Brazil believes that the post-2020 GBF must deliver solid commitments on capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, and technology transfer to developing countries. Therefore, a global capacity building strategic framework would provide a fundamental contribution to support the implementation of the GBF and should be part of the decisions to be adopted in COP15. Brazil takes note of the draft documents on this agenda item. We understand there is still significant room for improvement to achieve a clear, coherent, and effective long-term strategic framework. Regarding document SBI-3/7, we must recognize those situations in which parties may lack critical institutional and technical conditions to create enabling environments, and we must make sure that all parties will be able to benefit from capacity building initiatives. In addition, we should strengthen capacities to evaluate the effectiveness and replicability of traditional knowledge in order to improve the exchange of best practices. With respect to institutional arrangements to support capacity building, we are not confident that requesting the Secretariat to develop additional guidance and complementary indicators as proposed by paragraph 18 is the most suitable approach, as this could duplicate existing efforts. Moreover, further clarity is needed regarding the mandate of the Global Support Center proposed in paragraph 27. We must make sure that capacity building activities are as much as possible tailored to the needs and realities of countries and regions, as biodiversity conservation, for instance, is mostly implemented at the local level. As regards the informal advisory group, we understand that this group should also engage in improving the implementation of Article 19 of the Convention on the handling of biotechnology and distribution of benefits. Likewise, we should promote synergies between this advisory group and other relevant mechanisms within the Convention, such as the Horizon Scanning Mechanism for Synthetic Biology. Finally, regarding document SBI-3/7 Add 1, while we do understand the rationale behind identifying different levels of capacity, we must be careful not to add complexity to the framework. In this regard, we're not convinced of the added value of introducing specific categories for capacity building, such as soft capacities. This may lead to significant confusion on the priority areas that need to be addressed. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We look forward to continuing discussions on this topic.
Thank you, Brazil. And I would also like to congratulate you. I just received the information that Brazil has ratified the Nagoya Protocol. Congratulations from all of us. I will now continue with my list. I will try once again with China, followed by Norway and Argentina. China, you have the floor.
谢谢主席女士，可以听见我说话吗？
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Thank you, Madam Chair. China thanks very much the Secretariat for the detailed information provided. China is the largest developing country in the world. Under the framework of South-South cooperation, China has carried out a large amount of work along with other developing countries to support and assist developing countries, especially the LDCs, in reducing poverty and improving people's livelihood, as well as more tentative and choice in the biodiversity conservation. In recent years, China's foreign aid has been continuously increasing, and cooperation in technology and human resource development has been significantly enhanced. China believes that the various implementation means, such as capacity building, knowledge management and communication, are essential to the framework and are closely intertwined and linked. Therefore, China is open to a common institutional mechanism to coordinate the above mentioned work. We are open for more consultations with all parties. We are deeply aware that most developing countries and countries with economies in transition lack implementation capabilities and have received insufficient resources. And China agrees that the implementation means should be commensurate with the framework and the ambition, and China calls on developed countries to continue to fulfill their obligation under Article 20 of the Convention. China agrees with diversified and innovative funding channels, especially cooperation with the private sector, as important supplementary means. At the same time, developing countries should also make good use of existing financial mechanisms and set up a regular review and a reporting system for supervision purposes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, China. I now give the floor to Norway, followed by United Kingdom and Uganda. Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Capacity development, technical and scientific collaboration, knowledge management, and communication are all essential measures to reach the goals and targets of the post-2020 framework. The note from the Secretariat outlines an ambitious escalation of efforts to be funded by JEF and voluntary contributions. Norway notes that the capacity development strategy that the Secretariat has prepared in accordance with resolutions 1424 is comprehensive. We agree that elements relating to capacity development, technical, scientific cooperation, and knowledge and information sharing should be strengthened for the post-2020 framework. We do, however, question the need to copy several of the mechanisms established under the Climate Convention, as suggested in the document. Climate and biodiversity should increasingly be seen in context, but we do not see this being achieved by establishing parallel structures under the secretariats of the two conventions. Capacity development needs to be demand-driven and seen in the context of national plans. It should be carried out by competent institutions and entities that have experience in capacity development. Technical and scientific cooperation and IPA's role in compiling knowledge and capacity development are essential, as is communication and outreach to engage actors outside the biodiversity family. The Secretariat should limit their own role in this area and encourage other more experienced actors to take the lead. The Secretariat should focus on compiling reports and analysis of progress and make this available for parties and relevant operating actors of capacity development. We will actively participate in SBI's deliberation on this agenda item with the aim of obtaining a decision at COP15. The elements of capacity building that are linked to the post-2020 process should be forwarded to the open-ended working group and seen in connection with the discussion that takes place in the negotiations of a new global framework. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Norway. I now give the floor to United Kingdom, followed by Uganda and Switzerland. United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We welcome the progress on the capacity building activities in the short-term action plan and on activities to facilitate technical and scientific cooperation. The UK sees capacity building and improving technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer as a critical element for implementing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We support the shift to a longer-term strategic framework for capacity building, closely aligned with the post-2020 framework. We believe the framework should be underpinned by a streamlined monitoring and evaluation strategy, which will help us stay on track and learn from successes. We also agree that planned capacity building activities should look beyond the individual and work at institutional and other levels, including gender mainstreaming and local communities, to enable a more holistic approach. Technical and scientific cooperation will have a key role to play in building the capability of all parties and will need to cover the full breadth of issues in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. There is great potential to further mobilise networks of institutions and communities, both in capacity development and in technical and scientific cooperation. However, it's important that different networks and initiatives have clear and complementary roles, avoiding duplication of effort. The UK has some concerns around the extent and breadth of the proposals in the draft decision, in particular the number of requests directed to the Executive Secretary. We need to ensure proposals are feasible and are able to be delivered efficiently. Capacity building and technical scientific cooperation activities must make effective use of existing resources, provide value for money, and deliver against identified priorities and needs. Any new initiatives should have an appropriate level of governance, promote synergies with other MEAs and UN bodies, and should complement existing initiatives and programmes. In general, we support the expanded role for the Informal Advisory Group on Technical and Scientific Cooperation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, United Kingdom. I now give the floor to Uganda, followed by Switzerland and Panama. Uganda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, all submissions from Uganda for all items will be uploaded or uploaded on the system. Madam Chair, Uganda aligns itself with the DR Congo Speak on Behalf of African Group. Uganda recognizes the linkages between the work streams as means of implementing the post-20 Global Biodiversity Framework. We further support the idea of handling them as a package, exploring synergies among all of them. Specifically to capacity building, Uganda appreciates that capacity development is very important as a tool for implementation of the strategy. We find the guiding principles A to F adequate enough to provide directions on inclusive analysis and country commitment, monitoring and evaluation frameworks. We appreciate and support the 10 strategies laid down for improvement of capacity and good enough to address important issues, especially the integration of capacity building plans into the national development framework. Besides, Madam Chair, Uganda appreciates and emphasizes that resource mobilization is very necessary and required for effective capacity building program. Under technical and scientific cooperation, Uganda concurs with the set goals and objectives. Uganda emphasizes science, technology, and innovation for generation of scientific information and the need for scientific and technical cooperation among parties and organizations. Furthermore, Madam Chair, there is a need for global support center connected by a secretariat and complemented by regional support centers. Under knowledge management, Madam Chair, Uganda welcomes and supports the work program for the clearinghouse mechanism in support of the implementation of the strategy NBSAP 2011-2020. Besides, we call for more widespread training on the use of bioland tool to facilitate implementation of the MDSAPs. On communication, Uganda concurs that communication should go beyond awareness raising to enable behavioral change in society and institutions. Besides, Uganda reinforces the SBI request for communication activities, including the program of work on communication, education, public awareness, and outreach awareness raising, provisions of the post-2020 GBF, the United Nations Decade on Restoration, and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In conclusion, Madam Chair, Uganda supports elements of the draft recommendations and it calls for timely implementation of the long-term strategic framework for capacity development to support implementation of the post-2020 GBF and the related CBD protocols. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. I now give the floor to Switzerland, followed by Panama and Guatemala. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished colleagues, for Switzerland, capacity development, technical and scientific cooperation, including technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication, form an essential part of the means of implementation and will be instrumental for the successful implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We take note of the progress report on the technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer and believe important lessons for the post-2020 framework can be drawn from it. One of the findings of the progress report mentioned above refers to the issue of fragmentation and lack of coordination of capacity development efforts. Thus, we have a very strong reservation about the creation of yet another institutional mechanism to promote and facilitate technical and scientific cooperation, as proposed in paragraph 26 of document CBD/SBI-3/7. Several technology transfer initiatives and mechanisms, such as under the UNFCCC, the Technology Facilitation Mechanism under the Agenda 2030 and WIPO Green, already exist. Before discussing the potential setup of a new institution, we should focus on the potential for mainstreaming biodiversity considerations into existing mechanisms. Madam Chair, we welcome the other elements of a draft recommendation. However, we have some concerns about the clarity of the documents and on how we will proceed. The COP is expected to adopt a long-term strategic framework for capacity development to support the implementation of the post-2020 framework. But we are not sure which document will finally serve as a relevant working basis for our further discussions. Would the COP adopt the strategy captured and further developed as in Chapter 5 of document CBD/SBI/3/7, or as presented in its addendum, document CBD/SBI/3/7/addendum 1? We would welcome further clarification on this matter. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. I now give the floor to Panama, followed by Guatemala and Canada. Panama, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Chair, thank you for the organisation of these virtual meetings and the possibility to exchange on our general vision. We also wish to express our solidarity with all of the countries that have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and who are fighting to mitigate its effects. As regards capacity building and technical and scientific cooperation, as well as technology transfer, knowledge management and communications, we have the following comments. Panama supports the GRULAC statement made by Argentina at the start of the session period with reference to the need to have sufficient provision of financial resources, capacity building and technology transfer in line with Article 20 of the Convention in order to be able to effectively implement the post-2020 GBF. We wish to thank you for the documents produced by the Secretariat and the working groups related to the promotion of the implementation of a coherent approach to technical and scientific cooperation, as well as technology transfer, and also the proposals to create a technological initiative on biodiversity. We wish to make an appeal to step up the efforts being made to further improve the outcome-based management methods that are applied to technical cooperation projects in order to allow for assessment of their relevance, quality and impact. We support increased efficiency in the development of technical cooperation, research advisory services, action-oriented strategies, technology and knowledge transfer, and the setting up of partnerships with all of the actors from civil society and the private sector. We reiterate that the principles that should guide technical cooperation are transparency and efficiency in the allocation and use of resources to ensure the sustainability and predictability of these resources. Panama is convinced that we need to maximize biodiversity conservation measures and ensure that ecosystem services are maintained or recovered through an interconnected network of terrestrial and marine landscapes, thus making a fundamental contribution to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
I now give the floor to Guatemala, followed by Canada and Malawi. Guatemala, you have the floor.
Buen día a todos. Señora.
Good day to everyone. Madam Chair, implementation of a strategic framework for capacity development should include a mechanism to assess the impact of actions in countries and amongst beneficiaries, as well as better monitoring of the acquired capacities and their implementation. Each activity related to capacity building, technology transfer, and scientific and technical cooperation should be accompanied by sufficient funding and human resources to ensure that these activities can be carried out successfully, and should take seriously the recommendations issued by the CBD Secretariat as regards restrictions on the implementation of these different elements. Guatemala considers that a new capacity development plan should be more inclusive. It should take account of the participation of IPLCs, as well as women, youth, and citizen scientists who actively support the conservation of biodiversity, as they're the main actors for transmitting new knowledge and raising awareness amongst the population. The government of Guatemala is making efforts to organize a national experts group for monitoring the Global Taxonomy Initiative and facilitating the exchange of information, experience, skills, and specialized technical knowledge, as well as monitoring the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which could take place at a national or regional level. We believe that it is highly relevant to implement actions to reduce taxonomic obstacles, including financial support through more specific cooperation projects focused on strengthening national reference biological collections and capacity building for new generations of curators and taxonomists, especially in mega-diverse countries, as they are the starting point for identifying new species and carrying out more specialized studies that contribute to biodiversity knowledge and also allow us to avoid the loss of species that are as yet unknown to science. These comments will be submitted in writing during the formal SBI meetings. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Guatemala. I now give the floor to Canada, followed by Bosnia and Herzegovina and Argentina. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On Part A, Canada underscores the critical importance of ensuring we have a strong commitment on capacity building in the post-2020 GBF. We have heard for a long time that countries, particularly developing countries, feel that our collective efforts to build capacity to address the convention have been underwhelming. We agree that this needs to change. But what should this change look like? We thought we would see this illustrated in the long-term framework on capacity building, a document that in our view should help the CBD community define how we all can support the implementation of capacity building and technical cooperation activities on the ground in countries. We think a lot more work will be required to bring the long-term framework to this point, and have some general observations that we can provide in writing given our limited time. Canada remains very eager and willing to roll up our sleeves with our partners here in the CBD to work on this over the coming months. Regarding Annex 2, Canada supports Option 1, which would offer an objective process for reviewing and renewing technical and scientific cooperation programs. In our view, this process should be completed before further consideration of the institutional mechanisms and support centers presented in IMP16. This is to ensure that we are focusing our resources on the capacity building and technical and scientific cooperation needs of parties. Canada further supports the inclusion of capacity building in the guidance to the GEF for the 8th replenishment. On Part B, Canada is supportive of developing a work program for the CHM up to 2030 and of having a knowledge management component of the post-2020 GBF. We note the importance of including evidence from different knowledge systems, in particular traditional knowledge systems. With that in mind, we would suggest a notification process to invite Indigenous peoples to provide comments on the component as a way to ensure that Indigenous knowledge is well reflected in the document. To ensure alignment with the post-2020 GBF, Canada is of the view that the knowledge management component be forwarded to OEWG3 rather than directly to COP15. On Part C, like with capacity building, we believe that communication and public awareness are crucial elements for the implementation of the convention, including the post-2020 GBF. Concerted efforts are needed to amplify messaging about the importance of conserving and sustainably using the biodiversity of our planet. Given our limited time, we will provide additional comments and changes in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Canada. I will now try, Malawi, you have disappeared in the list, but now you're back again. So I first give the floor to Malawi, followed by Bosnia and Herzegovina and Argentina. Malawi, please, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Malawi supports the statement made by DRC
on behalf of Africa and sees a great need to invest in capacity technology transfer and the need to invest in strategic communication for ensuring the effective implementation of the framework. We also join Ethiopia to recognize the support through the Global Environment Facility and other bilateral arrangements towards capacity building. We welcome the formation of the Advisory Committee in Capacity Building that are yet to be more clarified to continue refining the long-term capacity development way. We are pleased that
I'm afraid we lost Malawi. Okay, I'm afraid we lost the speaker. I think we continue with Bosnia and Herzegovina, followed by Argentina. Bosnia and Herzegovina, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bosnia and Herzegovina thanks the Secretariat for preparing the comprehensive set of documents related to this agenda item. Regarding capacity building, we welcome the preliminary report on the implementation of the short-term action plan, which very well reflects diversity and number of activities undertaken in capacity building. We want to emphasize that achieved results of short-term plan should be better communicated and promoted, because in that way they can help countries that didn't have an opportunity to be supported. Here we want to point out that capacity building should be systematic and well aligned with different phases of the implementation of GBF. In this regard, we believe that global capacity building strategy is the right response and the right way to support countries in implementing the global biodiversity framework. However, we also emphasize the need for the long-term strategic framework for capacity development to be more discussed in future sessions of SBI. In connection to the need for capacity development in implement the monitoring framework, we believe that parties to the convention should agree on the strong mission of long-term strategic framework by 2030, which then could play as a great milestone in the achievement of 2050 vision. Regarding respected results of capacity building, it is necessary to highlight the accumulation of knowledge and experience that will contribute to the positive transformative changes. Regarding the implementation mechanisms, we believe that the new high-level implementation support committee should be able to warn parties of the need for possible corrections during the implementation of framework. We believe that the task of this committee should be explained in more details. Regarding technical and scientific cooperation, we support proposal that the Global Support Center follows the institutional arrangement according to the hybrid model of option A and option B. In this regard, we emphasize the need for stronger links with other biodiversity-related conventions. We especially emphasize the existing mechanisms, such as consortium of scientific partners, which should be put in the function of stronger connection with and utilization in science policy dialogue in cooperation with EPIBES. In strengthening this cooperation, we believe that 5th Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity can benefit from integration of traditional knowledge achieved through national ecosystem assessments around the world. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Bosnia and Herzegovina. I will now give Malawi a second chance. You have the floor again.
But it's not showing.
Malawi. Okay, I continue with Argentina. We can back to Malawi. Argentina, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Madam Chair. So this is a statement that's informal and provisional in nature and does not constitute adoption of a position on the documents to be discussed at the formal SBI-3. As a general criterion, Argentina considers that cooperation initiatives derived from the CDB should be focused on national implementation of the Convention. Therefore, the scientific and technical cooperation framework should promote projects that are adapted to the priorities and needs of the parties involved and should count on their approval, should foster linkages with capacity that already exists on the ground so that these can be harnessed and be allowed to reach their full potential. On the question as to whether a global scientific and technical cooperation support centre or regional centres should be set up, before taking a decision, Argentina reiterates the need to make more detailed information available about the financial implications of these proposals, as well as their strengths and weaknesses and possible overlap with other structures in order to assess its usefulness. Turning now to the proposals for an inclusive review and renewal process related to the scientific and technical cooperation programs, Argentina wishes to express its preference for option number 1. We would like to have a solution where there can be a detailed, focused and impartial, relatively fast assessment carried out by commissioning an expert group. So on the topic of communication, we recall that Decision 1426 is restricted to asking to continue implementing the framework for a global communication strategy. Argentina believes that this document should be revised in order to not go beyond the mandate of this decision, in particular taking account that the communication strategy of an intergovernmental process should be agreed upon by the parties. So in this respect, looking to the future, Argentina suggests that we should develop terms of reference for the communication work of the secretariat agreed by government representatives in order to promote communication that matches the biodiversity vision shared by all the parties. To conclude, Argentina wishes to reaffirm that scientific and technical cooperation, supported by an appropriate capacity developing strategy and knowledge management and communication strategy, will be fundamental for the effective implementation of the global framework and the 3 objectives of the Convention. So we reiterate our will to actively participate in future discussions on this matter. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Argentina. And I will try to come back to Malawi. You had the floor again. Go ahead.
All right, thank you.
Malawi, are you still online? Okay, I suggest, since we are late in the meeting, that we come back to Malawi tomorrow. If that is okay. Or
Okay.
can Malawi speak now?
We are online now. I don't know if you can.
Okay,
You are
please
able
go.
to hear us.
Please go ahead. I hear you.
Okay. If I get cut, I'll just submit written submission, so it's fine. Malawi supports the statement that was made by DRC on behalf of Africa, and we see a great need to invest in capacity building, technology transfer, and also in strategic communication for ensuring the effective implementation
Okay, I think we lost the speaker. I think we had to continue. If we can come back to Malawi tomorrow. I have one more party on my list. It's Comoros. You had the floor. Comoros? Okay. Okay, colleagues, I think that we have to come back to this agenda item tomorrow. But it's close to 10 a.m. and I need to conclude for today. Before I end this session, I will remind all participants to upload statements and also log in early, check connections, and also have alternative speakers if needed. All have possibility to have more than one speaker, as you know, so it could be good if you to be sure that you have one backup. We will now end our meeting and continue tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Montreal time, the same time as usual, with agenda item 7. And we continue with the major stakeholder groups statements. So thank you all for your active participation today. The meeting is adjourned.